Hi everyone. In this video, I'll show you how to create an executable thin war in Spring Boot and run it from the command prompt. A thin war keeps dependencies separate, making builds faster and deployments lighter. Let's get started. Let's start by generating a Spring Boot application using Spring Initializer. This will set up the project structure and dependencies for us. Now, let's configure our Spring Boot project. Select Java as the language. Choose Maven as the project type. Set the Spring Boot version to 3.43. Provide any group and artifact name as needed. Select War as the packaging type. Use Java 17 as the Java version. Add the Spring Web dependency. Spring Web provides the tools to build RESTful APIs and web applications using Spring MVC. Now, generate the project and extract it. Now, open the generated project in an IDE. Since I'm using IntelliJ IDEA, I'll open the folder there. Simply launch IntelliJ, select Open, and choose the project folder. Now, let's run the application using the main method in the main class. You can see the application has failed to start. Let's find the issue. Let me remove these unused tags first. In a war project, Spring Boot Starter Tomcat has a provided scope because the application is meant to run on an external server, which already includes Tomcat. To run it standalone, remove provided. And since we are not writing any test cases, let's remove the Spring Boot Starter test dependency as well. Let's start the application once again. You can see the app has started successfully. Now let me create a simple health check API to test the application. The health check API is working and responding with a 200 status code. Now let's build the application by running mvn clean install. Since I don't have Maven installed globally, I'll use the Maven wrapper, which is already included in the project, by running /mvnw clean install. The build is failing due to unnecessary test classes that are using test annotations, but we already removed the test dependency from pom.xml. Let me remove the test class as well. The build is successful. Let's check the target folder. You can see the generated war file. Let me rename it to app.war. Before creating the thin war, we need to collect all dependencies from target/app/webinf/lib. These libraries won't be packaged inside the war, but will be used as the class path when running the application. This next step is crucial and required before proceeding further. Now, copy the lib folder and keep it somewhere safe. I'll place it in the root of the project. Later, we'll use this lib directory as the class path while running the thin war. Now let's check the size of the war file. The current size is around 20 megabytes. Let me add the final name tag in the build section of pom.xml to generate the war with a readable name. Next, to create a thin war, we need to update the pom.xml by setting the scope as provided for each dependency. Let's build it again. If you check the size, it's the same as before, even with provided scope. This is because the Spring Boot Maven plugin still packages dependencies. To create a true thin war, we must skip this by setting skip true skip in the plugin. See the size, it has significantly reduced to just 4 kilobytes, making it a true thin war without dependencies. So the war is not getting executed because of a missing main class entry in its manifest file. The Spring Boot Maven plugin normally adds a main class, but since we skip repackaging, the war is no longer executable. So let's remove this plugin and use Maven War plugin, which is mainly used to configure war packaging. Next, we need to add the start class as com.app.thinwar.thinwar application, which tells Spring Boot which main application class to run after setting up the class path. After building and executing the thin war again, we see an error. Could not find or load main class org.springframework.boot.loader.launch.war launcher. This happens because the generated thin war doesn't include the war launcher class. So we need to add these Spring Boot Loader classes into the thin war itself to ensure war launcher is available at runtime. This plugin extracts the Spring Boot Loader classes before packaging the war. It runs during the prepare package phase, unpacks the Spring Boot Loader dependency, and places the extracted .class files into the target Spring Boot Loader directory. See, we're still getting the ClassNotFound error because even though the Maven dependency plugin unpacked the Spring Boot Loader classes, they were not automatically included in the war. So by adding the Web Resources section in Maven War plugin, we explicitly copy unpacked Spring Boot Loader directory files into the war's webinf classes. ensuring the war launcher and other loader classes are available at runtime. This makes the war executable. Great. This is a ClassNotFound exception for the Spring application class. This happens because the thin war needs its dependencies. Since we haven't provided the dependencies path, the application cannot find the required classes, leading to this error. If you remember at the beginning, we backed up the lib folder, which contains all the required dependencies for the thin war. Now we will use this lib folder as the class path while executing from the command line. Now let's execute the thin war using this command. Here, -cp target/app.war lib/ sets the class path to include both the war file and all the dependencies inside the lib folder. Then, org.springframework.boot.loader.launch.war launcher is used to launch the application properly. You can see that the war file is executed without any errors. Now let's check the war size again. Currently, the war file is approximately 205 KB in size. This is because it includes the mandatory Spring Loader classes needed for its proper execution. Now let's test the Health Check API. And it's working fine. If you found this video helpful, leave a comment and subscribe. In the next video, we'll deploy the thin war into an external Tomcat server with SSL configurations.